On the day the princess, who had once humiliated my husband, was wed, my elegant and refined husband, the Prime Minister, took his own life in his study. I held back my grief as I sorted through his belongings, only to discover countless portraits of the princess hidden in a secret compartment. Beneath each portrait was a small inscription, "My love, Wanwan." So he had loved her all along. The next time I opened my eyes, I was back to the day the princess took him into her residence. This time, instead of spending 10,000 taels of gold to buy his freedom, I simply offered a bland congratulation. His features are refined and elegant. Congratulations, Your Highness, on finding a new plaything. I recently acquired some new playthings. Let's see how they measure up. Princess Liwan, breathtakingly beautiful, sat at the head of the hall with a smile at her lips. With a clap of her hands, the palace servants dragged in a cage covered with red silk and placed it at the center of the banquet hall. The crowd's gazes, filled with curiosity and anticipation, turned toward the lavish golden cage on the stage. I watched coldly, my expression indifferent. Memories surged through my mind. I could almost see through the silk to the man inside. The same man I had seen in my past life, the graceful and noble Pei Xiuyan. Princess Liwan lived a life of extravagance, indulging in numerous lovers. She especially loved collecting handsome men from commoner backgrounds, keeping them as pets. Almost every man she took a liking to was brought to the princess's residence, only to be tormented to death. As a royal merchant, I had also been invited to her spring banquet in my past life. At that banquet, my eyes had fallen upon Pei Xiuyan, a man with striking yet delicate features, standing tall and proud like a pine tree in the bitter cold. I admired the calmness in his gaze despite his predicament, admired how he held his spine straight even while trapped in the mire. I was certain he was no ordinary man. He would accomplish great things in the future. My family had been merchants for generations, but my father had always taught me, a horse appraiser may overlook a thin horse. A talent scout may mistake a poor man. So I spent 10,000 taels of gold to buy him from the princess. Liwan was displeased but relented in the face of such a hefty sum and let me have Pei Xiuyan. I pulled him out of that hell, and he did not disappoint me. At a young age, he passed the imperial exams with flying colors, becoming the youngest top scholar in nearly a century. With his rise in the court, my family's business flourished like never before. When we got engaged, he hesitated slightly, but his mother was fond of me, so he agreed. At the time, I thought he just wasn't ready for marriage. After years of companionship and my kindness toward him, I was confident he had fallen deeply for me. The only time he ever touched me was on our wedding night. Pei Xiuyan drank heavily that night, stumbling into my arms, his warm breath brushing against my ear. He was especially passionate, whispering Wanwan over and over again. Blushing, I softly responded, my heart brimming with sweetness. But it wasn't until the princess's wedding day, when he took his own life and I sorted through his belongings, that I finally understood. Hidden in the secret compartment of his study were countless portraits of Liwan. The one he had called out that night was never my name, Linwan, it was hers, Liwan. No wonder on our wedding night, a man who never touched alcohol had drunk like he was trying to drown himself. Because only in his drunken haze could he mistake me for her. Humiliation and fury twisted together in my heart. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the very day of the princess's spring banquet. The eunuch lifted the corner of the red silk covering the cage with a golden rod. The crowd held their breath, eyes involuntarily following the eunuch's movements. As the silk was slowly drawn back, a breathtaking scene was revealed. 5 young men, dressed in thin, gauzy garments, gradually appeared before everyone's eyes. My gaze instinctively landed on Pei Xiuyan. His face was expressionless as he leaned against the cage wall, his hanging hand trembling ever so slightly. His soft hair veiled his eyes, and his jawline was smooth and delicate. A true embodiment of refined elegance, like a cold, distant moon. As the crowd gasped in admiration, Pei Xiuyan slowly lifted his amber eyes. His brows furrowed slightly as he adjusted to the light, his gaze sweeping the room as if searching for something. I frowned slightly. Why did he seem far less composed than in my previous life? Just then, as if sensing something, Pei Xiuyan turned his head toward me. Before our eyes could meet, I coldly averted my gaze. What do you all think of this batch? Princess Liwan raised an elegant brow, lounging lazily on the divan as she posed the question. The Prime Minister's daughter, eager to please, quickly chimed in. They're stunning, Your Highness. Far better than those in your harem now. The hall erupted in chatter as everyone voiced their opinions. Li Wan's gaze shifted, finally settling on me as I silently sipped my wine. What does Miss Lin think? I lifted my wine cup, but before I could speak, I felt a searing gaze on me. Pei Xiuyan was gripping the bars of the cage, staring at me intently, unblinking. His actions naturally caught the attention of others. Li Wan's expression darkened as she coldly asked, Do you know him? My face remained calm, but my heart clenched in shock. 1,000 speculations flashed through my mind. Pei Xiuyan was acting far too strangely. Could it be he had also been reborn? I fell silent for a moment before replying, No, I don't. Li Wan curled her lips into a smirk, her tone light, but her eyes sharp with hidden malice. This one seems quite fond of Miss Lin. If you like him, I could gift him to you. I responded evenly. His features are refined and elegant. How could I, a mere commoner, dare to take what belongs to Your Highness? I offer my congratulations instead. Li Wan narrowed her phoenix eyes before breaking into a satisfied smile. Meanwhile, inside the cage, Pei Xiuyan suddenly gripped the bars tightly. The force of his grip startled the young eunuch beside him. The thin fabric of his robe shifted slightly with his movements, revealing the faint scars of whiplashes and burns on his pale skin. Red scars against white flesh, a cruel yet mesmerizing contrast. In my past life, I had searched for the best physicians to remove those scars, fearing they would leave him with lasting trauma. Now, I realized I had been foolish. Perhaps he had even cherished those marks. I glanced at Pei Xiuyan again. His fragile body remained upright as he stared fixedly at me. A new doubt crept into my heart. He looked just like a pet, abandoned by its master, lost and bewildered. Suppressing my doubts, I turned to glance at the young man behind him, his gaze sharp and wild like that of a lone wolf. The future general of the northern frontier, Fu Zeyan. In my past life, I had heard of his untamed nature. Once, he nearly killed Li Wan, yet she adored this side of him and showered him with endless affection. Later, when Li Wan took him on a trip, he took the opportunity to fall off a cliff. She turned the imperial city upside down searching for him, but he was nowhere to be found. He reappeared 5 years later, having made remarkable military achievements in the northern frontier. The old emperor conferred upon him the title of General of the Northern Frontier. The emperor, obsessed with alchemy, was in failing health, at times lucid, at times muddled. At this critical moment, the third prince, who had long feigned frailty, finally revealed his capabilities. And Fu Zeyan was his sharpest blade. The crown prince and the eldest princess were siblings of the same mother. I had advised Pei Xiuyan many times to remain neutral, but he ignored my warnings and sided with the crown prince. It was only after his death that I understood why he had been so unwavering in his stance. It was likely because of Li Wan. Fu Zeyan and Pei Xiuyan were mortal enemies in court. The eldest princess's arranged marriage seemed to be orchestrated by the third prince's faction. As these thoughts surfaced, a wicked idea arose in me. I looked at Li Wan, pointed at Fu Zeyan, and said with a clear voice, Princess, how about I buy this young man from you for 10,000 taels of gold? Pei Xiuyan's gaze locked onto me, his usually cold eyes now tinged with broken traces of red. His slender fingers clenched so tightly around the wooden railing that his veins bulged, as if he were about to snap it in half. Meanwhile, the little wolf cub widened his eyes at me, his usually unruly yet handsome face now frozen in dumbfounded shock. Just like in my past life, Li Wan, though reluctant, still gave me Fu Zeyan in exchange for the gold. I lost interest in the latter half of the banquet and didn't spare another glance at the caged Pei Xiuyan. Once the banquet ended, my two servants, Zhao Kai and Jin Bao, carried the tightly bound Fu Zeyan onto my carriage. Sitting inside, I studied him. The people from the princess's manor had drugged him in advance with muting powder and muscle-weakening medicine to prevent his escape. Yet even in his weakened state, his eyes remained filled with ferocity and hostility. Thinking he must have gone a long time without food, I took a peach blossom pastry from a food box and tentatively held it to his lips. He simply stared at me, motionless. I held it there for a while, and just as I was about to lose interest and withdraw my hand, Fu Zeyan suddenly lunged forward and bit at me. The sudden movement nearly stopped my heart. Instinctively, I yanked my hand back and cursed under my breath. Truly a wolf cub. Tossing the pastry back into the food box, I closed my eyes to rest, ignoring him. After we returned to the manor, I ordered for him to be untied and locked in the courtyard next to mine. I went to my study to handle some affairs, and by evening, estimating that the drugs in his system should be wearing off, I had someone prepare a light meal of porridge and side dishes for him. Zhao Kai returned after delivering the meal, his face full of distress. "Master, I really couldn't control him, so I had the guards tie him to the bed and feed him. But as soon as the food went in, he spat it out." I absent-mindedly ran my fingers over the account book in my hands. Just then, Jin Bao returned from investigating Fu Zeyan's background. "Master, I found everything. Here, take a look." It turned out Fu Zeyan was an orphan. His father had been forcibly conscripted and later died on the battlefield. His mother remarried, leaving him to fend for himself. Had it not been for the kindness of the villagers, who each gave him a little food, he wouldn't have survived. One day, Liwan was out hunting near the border when she happened to discover him. She immediately decided to take him into the princess's manor. Fu Zeyan fled into the mountains, but the eldest princess was furious. She threatened the villagers, using their lives as leverage. Against imperial power, he had no choice but to surrender and follow her back. This was good news. Knowing someone's weakness made them easier to control. "Let's go see him." I rose and headed to the courtyard with Zhao Kai and Jin Bao. As soon as I stepped into the room, I saw Fu Zeyan bound to the golden-laid rosewood bed. His clothes were in disarray, and a few strands of his hair stuck out from his struggles, making his normally wild and unruly face appear somewhat endearing. When he saw me, his gaze turned wary and hostile. I met the little wolf cub's gaze unbothered. Zhao Kai brought over a chair, and I sat down leisurely, waving my hand for them to wait outside. Fu Zeyan's voice was hoarse, like sand scraping against stone.
"Speak."
"Why did you buy me?" I scoffed, pouring myself a cup of tea. "Relax, I have no interest in your body. A few years ago, while doing business, I heard rumors about a village tyrant in Linshui village. They said he was fierce and unruly, yet he never bullied the villagers. On the contrary, whenever bandits attacked, he would fight them off, undefeated." As I spoke, I observed his reaction. Sure enough, Fu Zeyan's tense expression gradually relaxed. I continued, "You may have lived in the wilderness, but you have a kind heart and a strong sense of loyalty. I couldn't bear to see someone like you suffer in the princess's manor. Besides, I'm a businessman, Fu Zeyan. I don't make losing deals." Fu Zeyan let out a disdainful scoff. Cut to the chase. "You're righteous and brave, and I have a vast business empire. In these chaotic times, countless thieves covet my wealth. If you stay at the Lin Manor, you'll be its protector. You'll have absolute freedom and rights. If you aspire for more and don't wish to remain under anyone's thumb, I will provide you with an education in both literature and martial arts. As for the villagers, I will ensure their well-being and protect them from the eldest princess's threats." I chuckled lightly. "Of course, if you refuse my terms, I'll consider the 10,000 taels as a payment for making a friend. You're free to leave. I'll even give you travel money. I only ask that if you rise to power one day, you remember to look after the Lin family." Fu Zeyan studied me carefully. as if weighing the sincerity of my words. I added, "But let me remind you, if you step out of this manor, I guarantee that within 3 days, the eldest princess will have you back in her grasp. Before your wings fully spread, I am the only one who can protect you, Fu Zeyan." Fu Zeyan stared at me intently. His long lashes cast shadows over his eyes, his expression tinged with frustration. Yet even this subdued look couldn't diminish his striking features. No wonder Liwan adored him for so many years. "Think it over. Give me your answer tomorrow." With that, I turned and left. Zhao Kai and Jin Bao stepped in to untie him. His wrists were red and swollen from the bindings, yet he didn't seem to feel the pain, his head lowered in deep thought. The next day at noon, Zhao Kai came to report that Fu Zeyan wanted to see me. I had him brought to the study. Fu Zeyan stood in silence for a moment after entering. I didn't urge him to speak. "I agree to your terms. Please make proper arrangements for the people in the village," he said in a hoarse voice. I curled my lips into a smile. "Of course. Get some rest these next few days. Your teacher will arrive soon." The tutors I had arranged for Fu Zeyan were the same as those I had selected for Pei Xiuyan in my previous life. They came to the residence during the day to instruct him. When I had nothing else to do, I would take a stroll to the study hall. Peering inside through the back window, I saw Fu Zeyan sitting cross-legged on a cushion, dressed in white, his back facing me. I was dazed for a few seconds, only snapping out of it when Zhao Kai reminded me. Even if the figure resembled him, the person before me was not Pei Xiuyan, and I was no longer the Lin Wan of my past life. Perhaps he was too desperate to change his fate. Fu Zeyan studied tirelessly every day. His body was already frail, and now he was exhausting himself both physically and mentally. I had the kitchen prepare nourishing meals for him daily, to keep him healthy. In the blink of an eye, nearly a month had passed. His initial wariness and distrust had faded, and he could now sit down and converse with me calmly. I worried that he might overwork himself, so I called him to the study. "The weather's nice today. How about going out for a walk?" Spring was in full bloom, with lush greenery covering the land. The carriage, adorned with fragrant leaf-patterned curtains, rumbled along the bustling streets of Chang'an. The opera house was performing loyalty and patriotism today. I recalled that in my past life, Fu Zeyan had become a general, so this place seemed like something he might appreciate. After stepping off the carriage, I was greeted by the sight of a picturesque bridge over a flowing stream. The opera house stood beside a lotus lake, with intricately carved pavilions above. The sound of the zither echoed in the air, blending with the soft, sorrowful singing. Beneath the pavilion, noble sons and wealthy patrons admired the blooming lotuses from their painted boats. Such an elegant place, naturally, was one of my properties. I took Fu Zeyan to the top floor, where the view was the best. By sheer coincidence, as soon as we ascended, we ran into Liwan inside a private box. She lounged on a beauty couch draped in white fur, her posture both dignified and languid. Several scantily clad young men attended to her, pouring wine, while Pei Xiuyan sat before a guzheng, dressed in a light, ethereal white robe. I stopped in my tracks. Fu Zeyan, unaware of the situation, followed my gaze into the private box. When he saw the scene inside, his eyes turned cold as ice. "Miss Lin, what a rare occasion for you to come watch an opera. And even rarer, you've brought a companion along." Liwan waved away the eager youth beside her, loosely adjusting the thin fabric that had slipped off her shoulders. Her tone was teasing as she looked at me and Fu Zeyan. I remained composed, avoiding Pei Xiuyan's barely noticeable gaze, and smiled faintly. He was getting restless in the residence, so I brought him out for a change of scenery. Liwan chuckled, glancing at the young wolf cub by my side, though the amusement in her eyes never reached their depths. No one noticed Pei Xiuyan's fingers tremble slightly over the guzheng when he heard my words. "Come pour Miss Lin a drink." Seated beside Liwan, I watched as she elegantly pointed at Pei Xiuyan. He lowered his gaze and rose to his feet. As he moved, the fresh scars on his fair chest became faintly visible. I glanced at them briefly before looking away. His wounds had nothing to do with me. His slender fingers picked up a white jade wine pot. My gaze lingered on the pot. His hand trembled slightly, and he failed to grip it properly. The lid rolled down the smooth jade table and landed on my lap. I said nothing, simply taking out a handkerchief to wipe the moisture from my clothing. Meanwhile, Li Wan's enchanting smile remained unchanged, though a dark shadow flickered in her eyes. Xiuyan, you seem a bit distracted these past 2 days. Kneel. Pei Xiuyan dropped to his knees. Li Wan's delicate, jade-white fingers gently grasped his chin, while her other hand tilted the white jade wine pot, pouring its contents down his throat. He coughed violently, his eyes reddening at the corners as the liquid forced its way in. Wine dribbled from the corners of his lips, soaking into his already thin robe. Beneath the table, Fu Zeyan's clenched fists trembled with suppressed rage, veins bulging as he gritted his teeth at the sight before him. Without changing my expression, I placed a hand over his fist, holding him back. No one understood Pei Xiuyan's suffering better than I did. At least in my past life, I did. But looking back, what I had once considered kindness toward him was merely unwarranted interference. Perhaps this was just a game of pleasure between him and Li Wan. After finishing the entire pot, Pei Xiuyan gasped for breath. Noticing my gaze, he looked up. Our eyes met, and then his gaze shifted downward, to where my hand still rested over Fu Zeyan's under the table. His expression darkened. It seemed that, compared to his current torment, he was more concerned about the man by my side. Once she had finished tormenting him, Li Wan appeared, quite satisfied. She ordered Pei Xiuyan to play the guzheng again. Expressionless, he took his seat and lifted his hands. Yet, for some reason, he hesitated for a moment before beginning to play Autumn Night's Yearning. My breath caught. The present and the past overlapped in my mind. I had been the one to teach him this piece. But hearing it now, I felt no warmth, no nostalgia, only disgust so strong it made me sick. And with that, my suspicions were confirmed. He had been reborn as well. He played Autumn Night's Yearning deliberately. Did he suspect that my actions differed from our past life and was testing whether I had also been reborn? Call me paranoid if you will. But for a man who had chosen to die for the eldest princess in his past life, the drastic change in his demeanor now was too suspicious. A cruel thought crossed my mind. Could it be that after living like a dog in the princess's residence for a few days, our once noble and upright Prime Minister Pei had started reminiscing about how good I had been to him in our past life? At that thought, my resentment eased somewhat. Mud would always be mud. No matter how high I elevated him, he would never change his filthy nature. Li Wan gazed at Pei Xiuyan's profile, her phoenix eyes narrowing affectionately as she leaned back slightly. Among all the people in the rear courtyard, he's my favorite. Though a bit dull, his face is truly the finest in our dynasty. I responded indifferently. I heard the Empress has been considering noble young men for you. He's just a plaything unworthy of the spotlight, princess. You mustn't take him too seriously. Pei Xiuyan struck a wrong note. Li Wan let out a low chuckle from her chest, her posture proud and audacious. So, what if I have a husband? Don't forget, this is the Li family's empire. You're absolutely right, princess. What's more, Xiuyan is exceptionally capable. Even the crown prince is fond of him. His birth may be lowly, but keeping him by my side is not out of the question. My eyes flickered. A servant brought a fresh wine jug and refilled my cup. I lifted the delicate drink, inhaling its fragrance slightly, and narrowed my eyes. Li Wan turned to me, smiling. I returned a slight smile, covered my sleeve, and downed the cup. Before long, I pressed a hand to my forehead, appearing dizzy. Li Wan's smile widened at the sight. Feigning embarrassment, I said, "Princess, my tolerance for alcohol is low. I fear I might embarrass myself in public. I should take my leave." Li Wan glanced toward the private room, her tone leaving no room for refusal. "There's a place to rest right here. Miss Lin, take a break." 2 young men approached to support me. Anger simmered in my heart, but I maintained my facade of embarrassment. Li Wan instructed them to take good care of me. I abruptly shook off their hands and grabbed Fu Zeyan. Yen can take care of me. I won't trouble you. Before Fu Zeyan could react, I dragged him into the inner chamber, slamming the door shut behind us and pressing him onto the bed. He stared at me, his mind momentarily blank, catching only the elegant fragrance of my breath brushing against him. A slight tremor ran through him, as if a snowflake had landed on his neck in winter. My hairpins had loosened slightly, my flushed face like morning clouds, completely different from the composed, calculating Lin Wan who always carried an account book. Panicked, he tried to push me away, but I pressed his shoulders down firmly. His usual roguish indifference was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his dark eyes were wide with innocent bewilderment as he blurted, "What are you doing, Lin Wan?" My once hazy eyes were now clear. Hovering over him, I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Don't move." That wine was drugged. My warm lips accidentally brushed against his ear. His body stiffened, breath faltering, unsure of where to place his hands. Unaware of his reaction, I continued. I poured all the wine into my sleeve. "I've seen this trick since childhood. How dare they try to play dirty on my turf?" The little wolf pup wasn't heartless. Upon hearing this, his brows furrowed. "Why would she drug you?" I let out a cold laugh. "She's always been arrogant and unreasonable, either because I snatched you away or because of Pei Xiuyan." As I spoke, I reached for a hidden compartment under the bed. "Can you scream?" "Scream?"
Yes.
"Have you ever seen a man and woman together? You don't need me to teach you, do you? You scream first, let me hear." Seeing Fu Zeyan's dumbfounded expression, I urged him again. He finally let out a perfunctory "ah." I squinted at him, unimpressed. Was that the cry of a wild donkey? Finally, my fingers found the raised latch. With a soft click, a tunnel appeared beneath the bed. I bent down and slipped inside, glancing at Fu Zeyan, who was still struggling to turn his face away. "Keep making noise. Do it properly. Don't let them suspect anything. I'll switch someone in." With that, I crawled into the tunnel. Fu Zeyan watched me disappear. After a long while, he flushed red, glanced at the door, and cursed under his breath. Once Fu Zeyan recovered, I arranged for him to begin martial training. After just 2 days, he suddenly collapsed in the training ground. Hearing the news, I immediately rushed back from my business trip. Zhao Kai had already summoned physician due the reason for the collapse. He had been training obsessively, refusing to rest even with a fever. I looked at Fu Zeyan, unconscious, his face pale as paper, and felt a wave of exasperation. "It's nothing serious. A couple of days' medicine will bring the fever down," Physician Du reassured me. I nodded in thanks and instructed Zhao Kai to prepare the medicine. Sitting beside the bed, I wiped the cold sweat from Fu Zeyan's forehead. As I wiped, I murmured, "You better not die. The third prince, Pei Xiuyan, and my Lin family still need you to help us rise to power." Fu Zeyan's brows knitted slightly. I froze mid-motion, but seeing that he hadn't woken, I sighed and continued to keep watch. I stayed by Fu Zeyan's side for the entire night. The next morning, Zhao Kai reported that the manager of Suayu Pavilion had come to visit. I frowned in suspicion. Suayu Pavilion belonged to the Empress's family, yet we had never had business dealings before. What could they possibly want? I instructed my servants to let the visitor wait in the hall while I changed. Upon entering the hall and seeing the guest, my expression froze. It wasn't just anyone, it was Pei Xiuyan. Wan, his voice was soft, affectionate. My gaze turned cold. "Young Master Pei, you overstep. My name is Lin Wan." The others tactfully withdrew, leaving only the two of us in the hall. "You've returned," Pei Xiuyan murmured, staring at me intensely. His certainty revealed his suspicions about my different behavior in this life. There was no point in pretending. I responded bluntly, "Yes." "So what? As a businessman, let's talk business. Today, you come as the manager of Suayu Pavilion. What do you want? If you're here to reminisce, I believe you and the princess have more to talk about." Pei Xiuyan's face turned deathly pale. I had never seen the noble, impeccable Prime Minister Pei look so pathetic. I sneered, relishing his pain. You saw them, Pei Xiuyan said hoarsely. All those paintings. Your deep love makes me sick. It was as if my disgust physically burned him. He staggered backward, unable to steady himself. I continued mercilessly. I don't know why you insist on acting so nauseating in this life, but Liwan isn't the type to tolerate a divided heart. Wan, his voice cracked with guilt. Don't call me that. My temples throbbed. I could no longer maintain a polite facade. The world calls me a merchant who only cares about profit, but Pei Xiuyan, you know how I treated you. Is this how you repay me? Years of deception. His eloquence, honed from years of political debate, failed him. He could only repeat a feeble "I'm sorry." Impatient, I cut him off. There's no business between the Lin family and Suiyu Pavilion. Young Master Pei, see yourself out. Pei Xiuyan stared at me, seeing only hatred in my eyes. His once immaculate composure crumbled like dead wood. Back in the study, Jinbao reported that Fu Zeyan had woken up. I pushed open the door to his room, but he was nowhere to be seen. I called out softly twice, Fu Zeyan, but there was no response. Instead, I heard the sound of water coming from the inner chamber. Lifting the curtain, I was immediately met with the sight of a young man's silhouette, faintly visible through the swirling mist. I quickly retreated to the outer room and awkwardly said, sorry. Inside, Fu Zeyan clearly hadn't reacted in time either. He remained silent for a long moment. Come to the study when you're done, I said before striding out of the courtyard. Although our dynasty was relatively open-minded, without strict separation between men and women, I was still somewhat conservative at heart. The study was dimly lit, the lanterns flickering. When Fu Zeyan came looking for me, I tried my best to act as if nothing had happened. He, too, pressed his lips together, feigning seriousness, but his ears were flushed pink. You were looking for me? He asked, sneaking a glance at me, visibly uneasy. I cleared my throat and said sternly, success isn't achieved overnight. Only with a strong body can one grow and improve faster. I hope you understand this. Fu Zeyan's gaze flickered, and after a moment, he let out a low If you're interested in this kind of training, once you've recovered, I'll take you to the military camp for some experience. The little wolf cub's eyes instantly lit up. Fu Zeyan left the residence at noon but hadn't returned by nightfall. My eyelid twitched, a bad omen. Instinct told me something was wrong. I sent Zhao Kai to investigate. The servant who returned reported that Fu Zeyan was at a gambling house, with a woman. A gambling house. Others might not know, but with memories of my past life, I did. That place was one of Wang Yuxing's businesses, a man who, in my previous life, had been Pei Xiuyan's classmate before Li Wan captured him. There was no time to hesitate. I took Zhao Kai, Jinbao, and a squad of guards, then set out for the gambling house in a carriage. On the way, Zhao Kai explained the situation. Fu Zeyan had a childhood friend named Liani. Liani's brother was a hopeless gambler. Unable to repay his debts, he was detained by the gambling house and had one of his legs broken today. Desperate to save himself, the gambler decided to sell his sister to pay off the debt. Wang Yuxing gave Liani a chance to raise the money, but she had no way to do so and could only turn to Fu Zeyan for help. But how could Fu Zeyan possibly have that kind of money? As a result, they were all detained at the gambling house, and Wang Yuxing's men were preparing to cripple Fu Zeyan as well. Just as we reached the entrance, we heard the sounds of shouting and fighting inside. Raising an eyebrow, I waved my hand, leading my people into the gambling house in an imposing wave. Inside was a scene of chaos. Dozens of thugs lay sprawled across the floor. Fu Zeyan stood there, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his eyes cold and filled with killing intent. He held a blood-stained stool, shielding a tear-streaked yet strikingly delicate Liani. Meanwhile, Liani's degenerate brother lay on the ground, wailing in agony. One arm and one leg had been broken. Wang Yuxing lounged on a grand armchair, one leg crossed over the other, with around 30 thugs standing behind him. When the people inside heard the commotion at the entrance, they all turned to look at me. Wang Yuxing spat on the ground, gave me a once-over, then chuckled. Boss Lin, what brings you to my humble establishment tonight? I offered a faint smile, my tone calm and unhurried. My man was foolish enough to cause trouble for you, Boss Wang. I've come to take him home. Wang Yuxing snorted and gestured toward Fu Zeyan. Your man? You mean this reckless brat? Fu Zeyan stared at me intently, not looking away for even a second. That's right, I confirmed. Wang Yuxing's expression turned cold. And if I refuse to let you take him? Zhao Kai brought over a chair, and I draped my cloak over it before sitting down, composed. You're welcome to try. But if you don't let him go now, by morning, evidence of your tax evasion will be sitting on an official's desk. I may not be much, but I have friends in the government, enough to ensure you rot in prison for the rest of your life. Wang Yuxing was infamous for his ruthless business dealings, always profiting at others' expense. The merchants of the capital had long nicknamed him Wang the Dog. His face twisted in rage as he glared at me, veins bulging. After a long silence, he exhaled heavily and shot a venomous look at Fu Zeyan. Kid, you got lucky today. Get out. Fu Zeyan hesitated, glancing at Liani, who was timidly clutching his sleeve. I spoke coolly. I'm taking the girl, too. Wang Yuxing's face darkened. Lin Wan, don't push your luck. Her brother still owes me money. If she leaves, who's going to pay me back? Without a word, I tossed a money pouch onto the floor. Then, in an icy tone, I said, Tell Pei Xiuyan that I will settle this matter with him one by one. I stood up and left, the Lin family guards escorting Fu Zeyan and Liani out of the gambling house. Back at the residence, Fu Zeyan stood silently, stealing a glance at me before carefully choosing his words. Thank you for today. Suppressing the anger within me, I looked at him coldly, my tone frosty. Oh, we're definitely settling today's accounts. Your first crime, recklessness. You go around using the Lin family's name, yet the moment trouble arises, you panic, act rashly, and charge in headfirst. No matter Wang Yuxing's true intentions, if I hadn't intervened, his influence in Chang'an could have destroyed you 10 times over. Your second crime, neglecting your duty. As a Lin family guard, I don't even need to mention the 10,000 taels of gold invested in you. Think about the salary you receive each month. You were supposed to be on duty today, yet you left without notifying anyone. Do you think I brought you here to freeload? Your third crime, insubordination. Just because I've treated you well recently, do you think that makes us equals? I am your master. You are my servant. I have the right to punish you as I see fit. With the mess you caused tonight, I could have beaten you half to death, and no one would say a word. Utter stupidity. Fu Zeyan listened in silence, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides, but he didn't argue back. Go to Zhao Kai and receive your punishment. Once he left, I let out a frustrated breath. There was no way this incident had nothing to do with Pei Xiuyan. After all, in my previous life, nothing like this had ever happened. But whether he was trying to eliminate threats early or simply targeting me because I bought Fu Zeyan, it didn't matter. He had made a move against my people. That alone meant he had to pay. More importantly, after deceiving me for so many years in my past life, he had no right to expect mercy from me. I wrote a detailed diagram of the Crown Prince's faction, including Pei Xiuyan's secret networks, and ordered the shadow guards to place it discreetly in the third prince's carriage. Since Fu Zeyan cared so much for Liani, I had Zhao Kai ask her whether she was willing to abandon her wretched brother. Once I received confirmation, I had her brother thrown out of Chang'an to fend for himself. In the afternoon, I lay leisurely on the swing, reading the latest popular unofficial novel in Chang'an, The 108 Pregnancies, The Poison Doctor's Runaway with the Ball. I was grinning, just reaching the crucial scene where the male lead, out of jealousy and misunderstanding, forcefully kissed the female lead. As I read, the sunlight in front of me suddenly dimmed. Looking up, I saw Fu Zeyan standing before me, holding a tray of food, his gaze flickering uneasily. I quickly composed myself and asked, "What is it?" "I heard from Jean Bao that you like peach blossom pastries." I made some today. Jean Bao said they taste pretty good. Would you like to try?" The young wolf cub, with his sharp yet roguish features, unknowingly showed a hint of eagerness. He held out the tray with both hands, his lips pressed together nervously. I picked up a piece of pastry and glanced at Fu Zeyan. He was watching me closely, his eyes full of anticipation. I chuckled inwardly. This man couldn't hide his emotions at all. Fine, I'd give him an out. Taking a small bite, I said casually, "Not bad." Fu Zeyan's lips curled slightly in a restrained smile, and his usually cold brows softened. I wanted to apologize. I was impulsive yesterday and didn't think things through. It won't happen again. And thank you for what you did for Lieni. I waved my hand dismissively. I know you were anxious because of your beloved, but I helped her because she's capable. It was a mutually beneficial situation. No need to thank me. My beloved? Fu Zeyan froze, the smile stiffening on his lips. I took another bite of the pastry and mumbled, "Isn't Lieni your beloved?" "Of course not. Don't talk nonsense." Fu Zeyan stiffened, his back straightening as he hurriedly denied it. I merely assumed the boy was shy. Without much thought, I responded absent-mindedly while flipping through my novel. All right, she's not. I really don't like Lieni. I only see her as a sister." I hummed distractedly, still engrossed in my book. A classic perfunctory response from Lin Wan. Fu Zeyan's expression shifted several times as he stared at me for a long while, but I was too absorbed in the prince and the poison doctor's story to notice. After a long silence, he let out a quiet sigh, picked up the bamboo fan on the table, and began gently fanning me. Lieni had opened a wonton shop in the northern part of the city. When I passed by one day, she brought me a bowl of wontons. Her complexion looked much healthier than before, which told me that she was living well now. She rubbed her hands together, looking a bit embarrassed. "Miss Lin, I never had the chance to thank you. After that incident, I was afraid you'd hold a grudge against Brother Yen. But not only did you not get angry, you even helped me open this shop. I will never forget your great kindness. Brother Yen is a good man. When we were kids, my grandmother used to bring him food all the time, so he has always been grateful to my family. He treats me." Lieni paused, her gaze dimming. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "But only as family. Miss Lin, I can tell that Brother Yen cares about you." She smiled as she spoke, while my thoughts grew chaotic. I simply replied, "All right." I suddenly recalled the last Lantern Festival in Chang'an when I won a little pig-shaped lantern and cheerfully said it suited him. He had looked up at me. Behind him, countless lanterns flickered, the stars shining overhead. His bright, clear eyes gazed at me, dazed. Back then, he had a strange kind of innocence, almost childlike. For days after, he deliberately avoided my gaze. Yet, whenever I wasn't looking, he couldn't help but follow my every move. So that's how it was. Spring passed, summer came, and the northern wild geese flew south. In the blink of an eye, it was time for the annual royal hunt. Fu Zeyan had already mastered the basics of martial arts, so I brought him along to broaden his horizons. After a full day's journey, our carriage finally reached the outskirts of the royal hunting grounds. There, I saw two familiar faces, Li Wan and Pei Xiuyan. Li Wan sat in a perfumed carriage, accompanied by a new male pet, surrounded by an entourage of servants, looking like a celestial being descended to earth. Pei Xiuyan, however, was in the last carriage. After I delivered a secret letter to the third prince, the crown prince's faction began to weaken. Pei Xiuyan must have devised some new scheme to gain Li Wan's favor, which earned him a spot in the royal hunt this year. In this life, without my interference, his fate had finally taken its proper course. "This wine is too strong. Drink less." Fu Zeyan's words pulled me from my thoughts as he replaced the fruit wine in front of me with warm water. "Fu Zeyan, when did you become so naggy?" I muttered in dissatisfaction. "Dr. Du already told you to drink less. If you don't listen, I'll report you to him." All right, I got it. You're so annoying." I turned my head, only to meet Pei Xiuyan's deep, steady gaze. I didn't know how long he had been looking at me. Keeping my expression neutral, I shifted my gaze away. Fu Zeyan glanced at Pei Xiuyan, who was still staring at me from a distance, and smirked coldly. The Crown Prince then suggested a competition at the archery range, with a luminous pearl from the Eastern Sea as the prize. In my previous life, the champion was a newly appointed martial scholar. But this time, the participants were slightly different. Both Pei Xiuyan and Fu Zeyan had signed up. The two of them were too striking. Standing there, they made the others seem utterly out of place, their presence like a painting. The audience's attention was naturally drawn to them, one exuding an icy, pine-like elegance, the other radiating an untamed, fiery arrogance. Around me, I could hear the excited whispers of noble young ladies, all curious about Fu Zeyan. With 2 lifetimes of experience, Pei Xiuyan was bound to win against Fu Zeyan. Still, I let Fu Zeyan compete. It would be a good chance to temper his temperament. But to my surprise, Fu Zeyan performed exceptionally well. Despite only a year of training, he was already showing signs of surpassing Pei Xiuyan. The young man had grown, his physique lean yet sturdy. Clad in blue, with a quiver at his waist, his dark brows sharp and determined, he exuded an air of absolute confidence. For a moment, I thought I saw the past, him astride a horse, dressed in brilliant armor, a wild and unruly young general. The match was intense, with no clear winner among the 3 competitors. The Crown Prince watched with interest and remarked, "The younger generation is truly formidable." He then raised the stakes, leading to the final round. The new challenge required them to stand facing each other with an apple on their heads. They had to shoot it off their opponent's head. Success meant victory, but failure could mean death. Those who feared for their lives could surrender. Li Wan smiled, her gaze locked onto Fu Zeyan like a venomous snake eyeing its prey. The martial scholar's face turned pale. He was the first to back down. A life-or-death challenge like this belongs on the battlefield. I withdraw. Fu Zeyan sneered disdainfully. Before he could speak, I stood up and called out, "Ian." Everyone turned to look at me. With a pained expression, I softly said, "I don't feel well, Ian." Fu Zeyan's face immediately filled with worry. He tossed aside his quiver without hesitation, ignoring Pei Xiuyan, who was waiting for the match, and the onlookers in the stands. With one hand resting lightly on the railing, he leaped over and landed in front of me, taking my hand in his. He carefully studied my face and asked, "What's wrong?" "You were fine just now. I'll take you to see the imperial physician." Without waiting for my response, he turned to the Crown Prince and said, "Apologies, Your Highness. I forfeit." Pei Xiuyan silently watched my disappearing figure. After a long while, he finally lowered the bough he had been gripping. Back in the tent, the imperial physician checked my pulse for a long time before concluding that there was nothing serious, just a need for rest. Once the physician left, Fu Zeyan lowered his gaze and softly asked, "You didn't want me to compete with him, did you?" I was absolutely sure I'd win. That luminous pearl is beautiful, and I wanted to win it for you to make a set of jewelry. Fu Zeyan spoke with a hint of grievance. Seeing his expression, the words I had been about to say got stuck in my throat. I wasn't a fool. After what Leonie said, I had been paying more attention. Over the past year, I had clearly sensed his subtle affection. But after everything in my past life, I no longer had the heart for love. Besides, did Fu Zeyan even understand whether his feelings for me were admiration for a benefactor or genuine love? Since he never made his feelings obvious, I had never addressed them. But now, I couldn't let it continue any longer. It was time to make things clear. I hardened my expression and spoke coldly. "I appreciate the thought, but there's no need. If there's one thing I don't lack, it's money. If I want something, I'll buy it myself. That's not the same. This is my gesture of affection." Leaning against the bed, I watched as Fu Zeyan crouched down slightly. He looked up at me with his striking features, resembling a devoted believer. His eyes, however, were openly wounded. "If you're looking to talk about love, then you've got the wrong person. My time is limited. My biggest concern every day is how to use my time to yield the greatest return. Ian, this is the first and last time I'll say this. Don't waste your energy on me. There are far more important things in life than romance. Even if I were to love someone, it would be a man who stands tall and independent, not someone who clings to me. Otherwise, what difference would you have from Li Wan's playthings? My words were ruthless, leaving him no room for hope. Fu Zeyan remained silent for a long time. Only after a while did he finally lift his bloodshot eyes and say, word by word, "I understand, master." As soon as Fu Zeyan left, an unexpected guest arrived. I coldly looked at Pei Xiuyan, who was holding the prize from today's match. "What do you want, young Master Pei?" Pei Xiuyan hesitated for 2 seconds. The man who always hid his emotions seemed at a rare loss. He took out the luminous pearl and said, "I remember that in the past life, you loved luminous pearls." The past life? I sneered.
Huh.
Pearls like this? My father gifted me a whole chest of them for my 5th birthday. I liked that one in the past life because you were the one who gave it to me. And besides, you didn't win this pearl honorably. If the match had continued, you wouldn't have beaten Fu Zeyan. Pei Xiuyan's voice turned hoarse, his tone heavy enough to suffocate me. So, what if I couldn't win? As long as you still love me, that's enough. Pei Xiuyan grabbed my wrist and pulled me closer. I know you bought him just to spite me. I'll do anything to earn your forgiveness.
Just don't do this, okay?
Where did you get the confidence that I still love you? I forcefully yanked my hand away, feeling nothing but nausea down to my very core. The teacher you hired for him, the courtyard he lives in, everything was mine in the past life. My voice rose in anger. So, what if my motives were impure at first? Do you want to know the real reason I bought Fu Zeyan this time? It's because he's your nemesis. Just as I once raised you up, I will now elevate him. As long as you're miserable, I'll be happy. And most importantly, he's not as filthy as you. I threw myself backward, using a self-harming move to finally break free from Pei Xiuyan's grip. I was restless and irritated, unwilling to stay in the same space as him, unwilling to see his face for even another second. I pulled aside the tent flap to leave, only to bump into Fu Zeyan, who reeked of alcohol, holding a wine flask. My heart sank. I had no idea how long he had been there or how much he had heard. I stood still, silent. He gazed at me calmly, his eyes carrying the same distant indifference as when we first met. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, though I felt a tinge of guilt. So what if he had heard? No matter my intentions, I had indeed pulled him out of his fate. With that thought, I lowered my gaze coldly and stepped away from the mess. Li Wan sent an invitation, asking Fu Zeyan and me to join a small gathering at the princess's residence. I held the invitation, feeling torn. First, ever since we returned from the hunt, Fu Zeyan had been ignoring me. He looked at me like a stranger, and even when he had to interact with me, it was strictly businesslike. He was friendlier to Jinbao's dog than he was to me. Second, after the hunt, I had a feeling that Li Wan had taken an interest in Fu Zeyan again. She would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Right now, war was raging everywhere, and the court desperately needed money. My Lin family's business empire was vast. If I fell, the entire national economy would be shaken. So, at this moment, she probably wouldn't make things too difficult for me. But Fu Zeyan, he might not be so lucky. After careful consideration, I had Jinbao invite General Li for a meeting at the restaurant. It was time to send Fu Zeyan down the path he was meant to take. After arranging things with General Li, I called Fu Zeyan to the study. His expression was cold and distant, his already sharp gaze even harder to approach. Seeing him like this, my irritation flared. Without much patience, I informed him, "You'll depart at the end of the month to join the army." Fu Zeyan curled his lips into a cold sneer. "And after I join? Am I supposed to help you deal with Pei Xiuyan again, just like in the past life?" My temples throbbed. Anger flared 3 feet high.
Fu Zeyan, drop the sarcasm.
"Whether you go or not, I won't say another word about you. Pei Xiuyan is with the Crown Prince's faction, so what? Every faction in court is short on money. If I want to ruin Pei Xiuyan, I can do it with a snap of my fingers." My real concern is you falling into Li Wan's hands again. Do you get it? I glanced at his silent figure, feeling nothing but disappointment. A wolf cub would always be a wolf cub. No matter how long I raised him, he wouldn't be tamed.
Go.
I'll give you some travel expenses. Whatever path you choose after this is up to you. The Lin family has nothing to do with you anymore. Get out, I don't want to see you. I picked up my account books, no longer looking at him. Fu Zeyan stood there motionless for a long time. Finally, in a hoarse voice, he said, I'll go. Consider it repaying your kindness. With that, he left the study. I pressed my fingers against my forehead, rubbing away my irritation. The day he departed, I didn't go to see him off. After Jinbao returned, he told me that Fu Zeyan seemed absent-minded, frequently glancing toward the entrance. I thought he was exaggerating. 3 years passed in a flash. This time, with my support, Fu Zeyan grew much faster than in the previous life. Meanwhile, Pei Xiuyan's path wasn't as smooth as before. He struggled under the Crown Prince's command, and Li Wan's interest in him seemed to wane. While secretly sabotaging Pei Xiuyan, I also established contact with a third prince, saying, I wish to contribute to the founding of a new era and lend you a helping hand. Besides, in the previous life, the third prince's faction won the battle for the throne, so I had no reservations. After interacting with him, I couldn't say if he would be a wise ruler, but he would undoubtedly be a benevolent one. Recently, I planned to take Liani to Jiangnan to introduce some specialty snacks to the restaurant. On the way, we encountered a group of bandits, about 10 of them, all brutish and fierce, blocking the narrow path. The Lin family's guards and Jinbao formed a protective circle around Liani and me. The leader, a fat man with a pockmarked face, leered at us with beady eyes. Liani took a step forward, shielding me. Grinning, the fat man said, Little lady, tell these lackeys to step aside and hand over all valuables. That way, you'll suffer less. The bandits burst into laughter, their voices grating like the cries of bald doves. One of them whistled. Boss, can we split one of them among the brothers? We haven't had our fun in days. The fat man let out a hearty laugh, but before he could speak, a sharp whoosh sliced through the air. An arrow, swift and unstoppable, pierced right between his brows. The fat man's laughter froze, and the next moment he collapsed. Before the bandits could react, panic erupted among them. Jinbao looked around and spotted 3 men on horseback not far behind us. They were strikingly handsome, like gods descending from the heavens. The man leading them, holding a bow, had sharp features, a high nose, thin lips, and cold, deep-set eyes beneath dark lashes. In the biting wind, his military robe billowed slightly, and his noble yet stern face was indescribably captivating. Jinbao squinted for a long moment before his eyes widened in shock. Yanji, he shouted. At the inn, we rested briefly before heading downstairs to order a simple meal. After placing the order, Jinbao went to fetch Fu Zeyan and his 2 subordinates. It had been 3 years, and Jinbao chattered nonstop, asking Fu Zeyan all sorts of questions. I kept my eyes forward, chatting with Liani. Seeing Fu Zeyan again after so long, my discomfort outweighed the joy of reunion. Unexpectedly, Fu Zeyan sat directly beside me. My heart skipped a beat. Liani spoke to me, and I nodded along, but my mind was completely distracted by his presence. He had grown taller, his skin darker, his features sharper. He was no longer the boy who used to act spoiled. His every move now carried the oppressive aura of someone in power. I kept my thoughts in check and maintained the composed demeanor of a merchant, calmly eating my meal. So, you're Miss Lin? I've heard so much about you. One of Fu Zeyan's subordinates, Zhang Baogua, grinned at me. My chopsticks froze midair, but Fu Zeyan remained unfazed and simply said, Eat your food. Jinbao, still curious, asked, What are you guys doing here? What a coincidence. Zhang Baogua chuckled. We heard from the authorities that Miss Lin was here, and boss wanted to take a look. We too insisted on tagging along. Fu Zeyan cast him a cold glance. Zhang Baogua's smile stiffened. He shrank his neck, lowered his head, and focused on eating. Leonie smiled knowingly and exchanged a glance with Jean Bao. I only took a few more bites before putting down my chopsticks and heading upstairs. The moonlight was like flowing silver, and it was already midnight. Unable to sleep, I threw on a cloak and went for a walk in the inn's backyard pavilion. There, I found Fu Zeyan gazing at the moon. I stopped in my tracks. Sensing movement, he turned his head, and our eyes met in the air. This time, I didn't look away. "I almost died in Sanyuan," he said. "The terrain there is treacherous." We were ambushed. In the end, it was Baogua who risked his life to save me. We sat down on the stone bench. I looked at his chiseled profile as he spoke calmly about his 3 years in the northern frontier. "I wrote you over 200 letters, but I never sent a single one." Fu Zeyan turned to look at me, his eyes deep as a moonlit spring. "When I first went to the north, I was angry with you, holding on to my resentment. But when I was on the verge of death at Sanyuan, the only thought in my mind was, if only I could see you one more time. In that moment, all my grievances vanished. I just wanted to live. I just wanted to see you again." My chest tightened. I lowered my head, not wanting him to see my expression. That thought kept me alive every time I faced death. This year, we were finally recalled. The Third Prince's faction promoted me to General of the Northern Frontier. I, once merely a plaything of Li Wan, am now a thorn in the Crown Prince's side. The struggle for power, the trials of war. They call me the young general, praise me for my courage and strategy. My name is known throughout the capital. They say women, fame, and fortune are now within my grasp. Fu Zeyan paused, then let out a faint, self-mocking laugh. "But I don't want any of that. I just want to ask you one thing. Now, am I finally a man worthy of standing tall?" His voice softened, as if afraid to scare me away. "Wanwan, I've liked you for a very, very long time." The moonlight bathed his face, making his expression deep yet tender. After returning to Chang'an, Fu Zeyan was granted a title and moved into his own general's residence. Pei Xiuyan, lacking ability, could do nothing against the Third Prince's faction besides constantly trying to suppress Fu Zeyan. Without the connections and resources I had provided him in my past life, he could no longer replicate his former glory. But then I was kidnapped. I was taken from the streets of Chang'an, even with guards by my side. Leonie was injured while trying to protect me, her arm wounded. I had assumed my captors would be Li Wan or the Crown Prince's faction, but unexpectedly, it was Pei Xiuyan. Most of the shadow guards Fu Zeyan had assigned to me were killed. I was tied up and seated on a bed, my eyes covered with a silk cloth. Pei Xiuyan's slender fingers carefully removed the cloth as if it were some priceless treasure. I kept my eyes shut, slowly adjusting to the piercing light. He watched me with a faint smile, his gaze filled with an unfamiliar obsession and heat. I stared at him coldly and asked, "What? Did you kidnap me to avenge your princess?" Not long ago, envoys from the western regions had visited the imperial court. Their purpose was twofold: to establish diplomatic relations and to discuss the arranged marriage between Princess Li Wan and the western region's prince. Li Wan's notorious reputation had spread far and wide, and the envoys had naturally heard of it. However, since this marriage concerned the relations between two nations, it wasn't something that could be easily annulled. So I simply gave them a little push. While the emperor, the crown prince, and the envoys were touring the imperial garden, they happened to witness Li Wan cruelly tormenting the neglected 17th prince. With this, the western region had a legitimate reason to withdraw from the marriage, and I had finally avenged myself for the time she drugged me. The emperor lost all face, the people were furious, and complaints flooded in. The ministers submitted memorials in droves, and the loyal old Grand Chancellor even protested to the death. Li Wan was placed under indefinite house arrest in her princess's manor. By now, I had enough pieces in place within the palace. There were many ways to disgrace Li Wan, but I had no desire to stoop to her level and resort to drugging. Upon hearing my words, Pei Xiuyan let out a bitter laugh. "Wan, does this place look familiar to you?" I glanced around. The bed, the screen, the decor, all of it was eerily familiar. It was an exact replica of the bedroom we once shared in my past life. I spent years reconstructing our Lin residence from the last life. From now on, this will be our home, he said. Seeing the stubbornness in his eyes, a chill ran down my spine. You've been planning this for years? Pei Xiuyan, we no longer have a home together. Wake up. Pei Xiuyan lowered his cold brows and curled his lips into a faint smile, his expression like that of a benevolent deity or a devil luring its prey. Then who do you have a home with? Fu Zeyan? I know you're waiting for him to rescue you, but the fluorescent powder on your clothes and the remaining shadow guards, I've taken care of them all. No one will find this place. You're insane. Pei Xiuyan reached out to touch my face, but I jerked away. His eyes flickered, his expression turning ashen. Restraining himself, he simply straightened the folds of my clothing. I don't care if you call me a madman or a shameless scoundrel. As long as it keeps you by my side, then this is a brilliant strategy, one that breaks everything apart before rebuilding. Wanwan, do you know? This is actually our third lifetime. Pei Xiuyan seemed lost in his own world. Though he was looking at me, it felt as if he were gazing at something beyond me. In our first life, I took my own life. The Pei Xiuyan of that lifetime had all his pride and spirit crushed by Li Wan. Every kindness you showed me only made the pain of my past more unbearable. The happier I was, the more humiliating my past seemed. Even after you bought me out of the manor, I was still nothing but a plaything. I had to love her. Only then could I pretend I was still the innocent Pei Xiuyan who once walked in the world untainted. I'm sorry, Wanwan. I never got the chance to say a proper goodbye in that life. In our second life, I was reborn before our engagement. This time, I decided not to drag you down. I rejected the engagement. You didn't protest and accepted it calmly. At that moment, I actually felt a little lost. After that, Li Wan set her sights on me again, and I'm sure you can guess the ending. A plaything like me could never amount to anything. You got engaged to Feng Yang. At your engagement banquet I attended with Li Wan. You were as radiant as ever, and without me in your life, you were even more successful. Seeing Feng Yang by your side, I had an overwhelming urge to kill him. You were meant to be mine. In that second life, the celestial being showed me my true heart, so I ended my life again, to begin our third lifetime. Pei Xiuyan smiled, but I could see a single tear slipping down his cheek. This life is supposed to be our happy ending. It's meant to be. Or perhaps, I said coolly, unmoved by his story, the purpose of this life is for me to finally see you for what you are and avoid making the same mistake again. At least this is the last lifetime. What kind of karma have I accumulated to be stuck playing this game with you for 3 lives? Let me go. This is your last chance, Pei Xiuyan. His crimson-tinged, cold eyes lifted. Only if I die. If I get rid of Fu Zeyan, then you'll have no choice but to stay here with me. Isn't that right? He was determined to go down this path to the bitter end. I smiled faintly. If you kill him at midnight, by dawn, I'll be dead too. You know I always keep my word. I hadn't eaten for 3 days. Pei Xiuyan was powerless to threaten me with the lives of my household. After all these years, I was only now realizing that the seemingly divine Pei Chancellor could stoop to such shamelessness. I laughed. If I'm dead, what do I care about what happens afterward? In this life, I've failed my Lin family. Once I reach the underworld, I'll make amends. I continued my hunger strike, gambling that he would eventually break. On the 7th day, Pei Xiuyan kidnapped the famous physician Du, but because of that, Fu Zeyan was able to track him down. When Fu Zeyan found me, his eyes were icy cold as he carried me onto the carriage. I knew that was a sign of his anger. I clutched his sleeve. He rubbed my head and said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Then, he turned sharply and strode toward Pei Xiuyan. From outside the carriage, the sound of fists landing on flesh echoed through the air. I took out the peach blossom pastries Fu Zeyan had prepared for me. Before we even reached the general's manor, Zhao Kai was already waiting at the side gate. Upon hearing the commotion outside, he rushed out. Jin Bao grabbed him and scolded. calm down. They're not here yet. Zhao Kai punched Jinbao on the head. Calm down my ass. Brother, you hit me again. In this lifetime, without Pei Xiuyan's support, the Crown Prince's faction crumbled quickly. The third prince swept through his opposition like a storm. On the day the old emperor suddenly died from overdosing on elixirs, the third prince led his troops to surround the Crown Prince and his supporters, tearing up the imperial edict that named the Crown Prince as heir, right in front of them. With his victory secured, the third prince imprisoned the Crown Prince and Empress in the imperial mausoleum. It was only then that Fu Zeyan told me the truth: his mother had been murdered by the Empress. As for Li Wan, ever since the scandal with the Western Region envoy, she hadn't stepped foot outside her residence. She remained completely unaware of the power struggle that had taken place. The third prince decreed that the male concubines in the princess's residence were free to leave or stay as they wished. Once I recovered, I had Pei Xiuyan thrown into the princess's residence. Li Wan had long lost her former dignity as the eldest princess. Her body was covered in scars, revenge taken by the concubines she once abused. Her hair was disheveled, her complexion deathly pale, her face filled with a twisted malice. Yet, even now, she still clung to her old arrogance. She swung her hand violently, knocking the dishes off the table. The crash startled the elderly maid beside her. She screamed at me, "I am the eldest princess, Li Wan.
Lin Wan.
I will kill you all." I glanced at Pei Xiuyan, who was being restrained by the secret guards, and said coldly, "Perhaps the 3 lives you spoke of have finally reached their destined conclusion. In this lifetime, you and Li Wan truly belong to each other. Oh, and I still haven't settled the score for Liani's injury." The guards Fu Zeyan left for me entered the room. I reached for the sword at one of their waists, and in the next second, blood gushed from Pei Xiuyan's arm. He blinked through the blood clinging to his eyelashes, his entire arm drenched in crimson. At first, it was warm, but soon the blood cooled, darkening into frozen stains on the ground. He struggled, calling my name, Wan Wan, desperately trying to break free from the guard's hold. His trembling fingers reached for the hem of my dress. But the blood pooling beneath him spread like a silent, all-encompassing net. Expressionless, I stepped back and turned away, not sparing him or Li Wan another glance. By the time I left the princess's residence, dawn was just breaking. The sky was a muted gray, with a few faint stars flickering on and off in the distance. The cold wind stung my face, so sharp that even my breath felt like it could freeze midair. The Lin family's carriage was waiting outside. Fu Zeyan stood beside it, his figure tall and unwavering. "Liani, Zhao Kai, and Jinbao have prepared a feast for you at the restaurant, your favorite Hunan dishes." I reached for his outstretched, warm hand, let out a soft laugh, and said, "Let's go home." The end.